All right, everybody, welcome in. My name is Joe, and today we're going to play some well, actually, we're going to do some puzzles. So, just grab the puzzle of the day. I haven't done this one yet. It's a chance for me to kind of start out fresh, get myself in the mindset of playing some chess this morning, and then we can get into a game later on. But all right, so let's go through our process here. We assess the board real quick. Looks like white is down in exchange. 5 pawns to 5 pawns. Yeah, so white is down in exchange. Has a knight instead of a rook. And so let's go through our candidate moves. My first move is to throw a check on the king, and if I look at the squares in front of the king, right? So there is some squares taken away. And if the rook were to come here, the rook would cut off these, but the king does have some escape squares. And then the next thing to do is look at follow-up. Well, if the king moves to one of these two, whenever you have a knight in proximity to opponent's pieces, you gotta take a look at it. So there is definitely the possibility of a knight fork. Okay, that one can't happen because the pawn guards that. But there is definitely the possibility of a knight fork here, which at a minimum is going to win us back our exchange, but honestly, it doesn't look like there's any way black can get back to defend that rook, so we might actually end up an actual whole piece by the end of this. All right, so if we go here, we know that the king is forced into one of those two squares. If the king ends up on g5, we've got a nice fork. But if the king ends up down here on g4, we don't have a fork. We don't have a fork. So if the king ends up, so the king can go to g4. All right. So now that we've looked at, there is a possibility here. We got to keep going a little bit further. So this is where it gets complicated for me. So the knight is covering those two. The pawns are covering these. And if the rook slides over, the rook will be here, cutting off all of these. The king has an escape. We know what happens if the king goes here, right? If the king goes there, we've got the fork, so we can discount that move. But what about this king move? What kind of follow-up do we have? I'm looking at the possibility of my rook continuing its journey, picking up this pawn, cutting off this in the process. Okay. If the king goes here and the rook is along this file, if we push a pawn, the king can grab the pawn, and then we continue our journey with our rook, maybe? So if the rook is here cutting off these squares, the pawns are cutting off of these squares, the pawn is cutting off that square. Okay, that would force the king back to our target square. Right? So the king comes here, we push a pawn, we force the king to either, and we've got pawns guarding all these squares, force the king back in this direction, and then with check, and then the king is forced back in this direction. So at the end of that, we end up with the king on our key square, which gets us the fork. Driving the king back this way, we pick up the rook. Our rook is still sitting here. Is that a problem? No. Okay, so we have a really strong candidate move right now. That took us a good 4 minutes to try to solve that one. So we have a candidate move. We now have a good move. Check, pawn, or pawn actually. We have a pawn move that we know of that's going to work because the rook is here cutting off. The pawn is here. All right, the pawn is pushed, cutting off these. These are all pushed. If the king grabs the pawn, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. If the king grabs the pawn and then our rook slides over, the king can go back because that pawn is no longer there. Okay, so let's do the whole thing again. Rook slides over with check. The king is forced into one of these two squares. G5 is our target. We know that if the king lands there, we win. The king goes to G4, and we push a pawn. This exchange means the king can come right back, and we don't have the fork, and then we lose the opportunity because the rook is going to move. All right? If the king goes back to, so if the king ends up here, what happens if we push this pawn? The king can't take because the rook is still sitting here. The king can't take. Aha, and now if the king hides downward, all right, so if the pawn is pushed, the pawns are taking away these squares. The king can't take the pawn, so if the king slides down here, our king is taking away those squares and defending these pawns. Now, if our rook slides over, that's actually checkmate because the king doesn't have enough time to run away. So the king, if the king comes this way, which we know that he will, and then we push a pawn, the king can't go there. The king will have to go this direction. And then our pawn chain is still intact, forcing the king. Okay, so now we have the move. Okay, so we had a candidate move. We looked for a better candidate move, and we found what I think is the trick. Now, that all stems from this first move. Now, what's our rule after this? Now we have to go through and we have to look at the rest of the board, the rest of the 4 quadrants, right? I have a tendency to miss those. And the other 4 quadrants are things like this rook. If this knight is coming to here, this rook is going to want to be here to guard that. Could that happen? Check, move, check, move. Check, move, fork. Oops. Fork. With check, the king has to move again. We grab. And then the rook cannot really do anything. I mean, it can, but we can always escape with our knight, so there's really no trap there. Where all of our moves come with check, so we don't give our opponent a chance to check us. But if our opponent checks us, we do have an escape square, so we are not in checkmate. Okay, we've spent plenty of time on this particular example. I think we're ready to pull the trigger. Now, the other thing we want to do is, as we pull the trigger, in order to train ourselves and how to get better at this, we want to make sure that we follow through on our steps, right? So this, the king is going to move. If the king moves here, we've got our fork. If the king moves here, we're going to push our F pawn, which is going to drive the king to one of 3 squares. At that point, if the king goes to our square, then we do the fork. If the king goes to one of the other 2 squares, we take our rook, slide it back over, force the king to our kill square, and then we go. So now we're going to follow our steps. The king moved down. We're going to push this pawn. The king moved to the kill square. And now we pick up a whole, yes! All right, we did it. And so that's why I'm trying to use these as training techniques to more than just one move at a time. I want to look for entire move sequences, and then I want to follow those sequences. Yes, obviously if I make a move, I'm going to double check to make sure that I understood those sequences, but we're doing more than just the basics of verifying that we thought the one correct move. We're trying to look, did we think multiple correct moves in turn? All right, so completely random puzzle. Let's look at the material on the board real quick. Piece to 3 pieces. We each have a queen. 2 rooks to a rook. Okay, so if we look at piece, piece, rook, rook, queen, queen, black is down a little bit, has 1 rook for 2 pieces. Okay, all right, so now is there anything, the first move, the obvious move that I'm looking at right now is this check. This check comes with, this capture comes with check, forces white to respond. Now white can immediately grab, and so we trade off rooks. That could be a good thing. So we'll keep that one in the back of our mind as candidate move number 1, and we're going to keep exploring that. I'm just now looking for more obvious things, and I don't see any really more obvious things. Let's quickly analyze what our opponent's threat is. Well, right now this pawn is becoming very dangerous, but that's a little bit in the future, and these tactics are a little more immediate. We're looking for immediate tactics. We'll keep this in the back of our mind as a possibility. If at any point in time the queen throws a check, we've got it covered. If we move with check and let's say our opponent blocks, well, we have checkmate. So if we capture, we almost force our opponent to capture back. So we want to look at forcing lines. So capture, capture back. The part that we don't want to end up in is capture, block, capture. Oops. White captures with check, because this rook is the only thing that's defending this rook. All right, so let's quickly glance through. There is another option here. No, it's not, because that's covered. I was going to say, if we bring the bishop up, threaten, and then look to maybe pick this pawn up in for a longer term plan, but that doesn't work. Same with something like this to try to trade off the bishops. All right, so now let's look at, is there a way that we can chase this queen away? Maybe add a second attacker here? I have a dark square bishop, that's not going to help. And this rook is undefended, so that's not going to help. All right, here's a possibility. All right, so let's explore this line now for a second. The 2 rooks are teaming up on the queen. It's not any kind of trap, though, because the queen can always retreat. The queen can retreat because notice the queen is defended. Yeah, the queen can retreat to too many viable squares. So we're not trapping the queen in any way. Plus, the queen could always come back this way if they wanted to. All right, so we're not really trapping a queen. All right, I'm going back to this line. Let's explore this line a little bit more. Capture, capture. Rook up. Because the rook, if the rook and the queen are on here, this comes with check. The king can only go this direction, and then we just pick up with checkmate. So the queen and the rook along this 7th row, or 2nd row from the opposite side of the board, form a very dangerous battery that can't be stopped. So capture with check. If the bishop blocks and then we capture queen, right, let's see, captured, then white's move. So capture, block, capture, It's now black's to move. Black will have time. Yeah, black will have time to get the rook out of the way. Okay, so that's an option as well. The thing I was thinking of is capture, and then the bishop goes here. Notice the bishop is pinned, but if we move our rook, we unpin and they can grab. But either way, we're up that whole rook at the beginning. We trade queens and we're up a rook. That would be huge. So if captures and the bishop defends, then we just win. We go up a whole rook. Capture here. The queen will have to come here to defend. Then what? Then what? We don't have this trap because then the queen can just swing back. Capture, rook up. I'm not seeing where this goes is my problem. I'm not able to visualize it. But if the queen just falls back here to defend, then black's attack dies out. And in fact, that case, black is going to be getting a queen, or white's going to be getting a queen trade, helping white out. Huh. And the bishop is too slow, again, because this knight is in the way. This bishop is going to be too slow to try to get involved in the attack. Okay, so maybe this is not our candidate move because all we're doing is trading rooks. All right, is there any better follow-up from here? Capture. Is there any better follow-up? I'm not seeing it. Are you guys seeing it? No, I'm not seeing a follow-up from there. Capture. And we just, again, give them a queen trade. You know, bring the queen back, get a queen trade in. And we can't hope that our opponent plays the move we want them to play because they're not going to do that. They're going to play the better move. And in this case, this looks to be the better move. And I just don't have any follow-up. All right, so we got to come at this with fresh eyes. All right. So maybe we just maybe we just start with a rook move here. we're threatening here. No, that doesn't work because in this case, nope, the queen won't have it defended because the knight's in the way. So if we bring the rook up to start the show, we just change the move order, right? Now we're threatening here. In order to defend, white would have to bring the rook back, because this rook is pinned, so if we slide this rook up, we're threatening basically a forced mating sequence. So how does white defend against that? How does white defend against our rook and queen there? Slide the rook here, but then that just leads to, no, it's not checkmate because the bishop's holding on. But then we can just take the rook, and then we still have this battery to push through. All right, this is looking better and better, and if my opponent tries to block with the queen, we just grab a queen. That rook is still pinned. I'm liking this a lot more. What do you guys think? I'm liking this a lot more. Just start with the rook up. Threaten checkmate. But we have to remember that there is always this check. Ooh, dadgummit. Because if we just threaten, our opponent will then check. We block check, but our opponent then has checkmate. Ha! All right, I have exhausted my opportunities. Candidate move number 2 is a no-go, specifically because this, and even if I were to bring the queen down, I'm just giving up a queen. There's no additional way to block. So if I move this rook without a checkmate, so I have to go back to this one, even if it means just straight up trading. So, all right, that's where we're back to. So I've spent too much time on this one. For my standpoint, I'm gonna go back to the best move I could find is this one, and then I'm gonna study this to see why it works, why it doesn't. Because I don't see a follow-up here. Either the queen comes here or the rook goes there. But again, the rook goes here. This is threatened. If I sacrifice the queen, that doesn't even give me a chance to, I could throw a check here. Nope, I just don't see it. And if I move the rook here, it's checkmate because the same exact pattern. I don't see it. Oh, the bishop covers. Tunnel vision. Tunnel vision. This long-range piece, I got tunnel vision. I didn't follow my steps, and I didn't go back and check all of my 4 quadrants. Because the queen captures, and then we couldn't find a follow-up. Well, the rook is defended. Ah, phooey. So, yep, that happens. Exactly like I said, it's a fault of mine that I lose the 4 quadrants, and I have to do a better job on seeing all 4 quadrants and not just 1 or 2. All right, let's get one more in. Puzzle time. Okay, so we've got a rook and a rook. We've got a rook and a rook. We've got a pair of bishops, pair of bishops. We've got a pair of knights, pair of knights. Each got a queen. Okay, so material's about even. The most obvious thing right now is this sacrifice gonna work? And the answer is no. Sacrifice, my opponent could take back with either piece. That sacrifice doesn't do anything. Not gonna happen. All right. Scan the board for threats, undefended pieces, weakly defended pieces. This particular rook is looking a little soft. It's kind of blocked in. I'm not really seeing anything there yet. Always check your knight forks, right? Always check to see if there's a knight fork available. If we grab here, okay, all right, I'm starting to see something. Do you guys see it? There's a lot of things piled up in this center. So let's look to see if any of them work for us. Capture, capture, queen captures, we're up a piece. And then if the queens get traded off the board, we're up a piece. So bishop, we lose a bishop. No, at the end of that line, there is still the knight capture. Okay. So capture. If the pawn captures, that means we have 2 attackers on this bishop. My opponent only has 1 defender on that bishop, therefore we can grab and pick up a piece that way. But captures, that's why I was looking at this line first, is because this line we know is beneficial for us. So if captures, so my opponent grabs back with the, not so fast, because that pawn has now moved. Okay, these get tricky. Capture, capture, queen, queen, bishop, he grabs a knight. I have this, I guess, at the end of that line. And then if he grabs, I can stick a rook under and I'm safe. Okay. All right, what about capture, bishop, I'm looking to see if this knight can get out of the way, kind of with some kind of tempo. And not really, so we'd have to grab the queen, and then they grab here. Well, no, that's an undefended queen, so queen trade, and then they grab the knight at the end. It's an even trade all around. All right, so that might work. All right, so let's keep that as our candidate move, and let's move on to the next versions. All right, what if we were to... Yeah, there's no check, so that loses. That's covered. This is all covered. I don't really see any fantastic knight forks. And even if I tried something sneaky, like, you know, sticking the knight here to convince the queen to come offline, to, you know, sacrifice the knight to remove the defender of the bishop, it's not going to work, because the queen, no matter where the knight goes, right, the queen can keep an eye on it. So even if we stick the knight on one of these 2 squares, it doesn't work. Sacrifice, is there anything there? No follow-up. Nothing to pin. I just keep falling back on this particular knight grab. All right, let's go back through our corners. Let's check our quadrants. Yeah, at the end of both of these lines, the best I have is rook to an open file. All right, let's change the move order. Grab, grab. Grab, grab. Can this knight do anything? Can the knight go back? If we just grab with the pawn, our opponent grabs with the pawn. But that gives us time to move the knight. Okay, hang on a second, hang on. It means breaking up the position in front of our king, but let's take a look at this one. Grab, grab, grab back, grab back. So let's see, I get a bishop, my opponent gets a bishop, I get a bishop, and then my opponent gets a knight, so we're back to even. I have time to move my knight, but I'm not actually winning any material there. So this is where I would stop and come back with fresh eyes, because I'm not seeing it and I'm focusing too much on this one move, and I need to get away from that move and I need to look at something else. So I would need to look at attacking this bishop twice, sacrificing this bishop here, chasing the queen off this way, yeah, I'm struggling. I don't know, guys. All right, so I got to go with the only candidate move I found, and we'll just kind of play it from there. I'm not happy with this. This is 2 losses in a row. It's frustrating, but that's how it goes sometimes. But we're learning, right? This is the learning process. So we'll grab here. That is indeed the best move. Notice our opponent can grab here, here, and the best we can do is grab here. So we're even, right? We've traded. In fact, we've traded bishops, so we're identical even. Grab, grab, and there's nothing left. Maybe that's what this is all about, is opening up this. And that's where it ends. See, I disagree because we're about to lose a bishop. So this is where I would turn on the analysis and go back to the beginning and try to figure this out, because I don't. So before this move happened, white had a 1-point advantage. After this move, it says white is down essentially a whole piece. And then we go bishop, bishop. Right, so it's, yeah, bishop, bishop. Black picked up a bishop, so black is up a bishop right now. Trade queens, and then we're back to even, and then, like I said, that's what it's all about. Okay? We had to even look one more move past that, all that, and see this. So yeah, I mean, we got there, but I'm not happy with it. You know, I didn't see this connection until after we made the first move in this exchange. Right, until after that first move was made did I finally see this. So I missed seeing that. But man, that's all that this is about, is and then grab this pawn, no matter how the knight develops, and then there's an exchange. Black is up in exchange. I don't know. It's iffy. I would say it's real iffy at this point. If you especially look at Black's position. All right, kingside is absolutely destroyed. White doesn't have the rook pair, so it's not too much of a danger, but even with one rook on the board, picking up these isolated pawns shouldn't be too hard. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think this is going to be an interesting game to play. This majority here is probably going to be the winning advantage more than anything. But I'm having a hard time seeing this. But that's why I'm a low-rated player, right? I don't see everything. But that's fine. Okay, well, we made it through. Surprisingly, we got that one. I'm not giving myself credit for it because, like I said, I didn't see... We found a good series of moves, but I was not able to convince myself it was the best move because I didn't see this long-range piece. And, I mean, I guess technically we did say that that rook was soft because it was trapped in. I mean, we saw a lot of it. I guess I should give myself credit, right? Give myself credit for what I did accomplish. I saw a lot of it, but it's hard to say that that's a win when, yeah, because even if the queen comes off the board like that, it still gives you that at the end of the day. And what happens if we choose to take back this way? Yeah. Because then the queen can happily sit here, and the queen does not have to leave defense of this pawn. Can get developed. Okay. All right, well, anyway, we got there in the end, I guess, somehow. So that's just 3 puzzles in 30 minutes. Those took a long time, but I like to explain them. There were some difficulties in there. I'm proud of the fact that we got as close as we did. The previous puzzle number 2, I'm frustrated. I lost that. In fact, both of these puzzles, it was the long-range piece away from where we were, studying, where we were focusing. I was focusing really tight on the middle of the board, and I didn't look at the wings as much as I should have. And both times, it was those long-range pieces that got me, bit me in the butt, so... Alrighty guys, this was puzzles. Go out and do some puzzles. Do your practicing for your mid games. Practice your opening, right? Memorize that pattern, right? The Italia and the Ruy Lopez, maybe a King's Indian defense. Get yourselves in a position where you can start a game, you can get through the middle, and we're gonna study some end games here pretty soon. All right guys, take care.